Hey, middle school students, Justin McFarland here, and glad to connect with you again. Hey, we're going through Mark. We're looking at chapters 7 and 8. And so right now I encourage you to go pause this video and read Mark 7 and 8. So do that now. And now that you've read it, I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and then I encourage you to read it again. That's just a good way to study the Bible, is read it, hear from what someone else says, and then go back and look at it again. So anyway, Mark 7 is really interesting, and I want to focus kind of big picture on Mark 7. You see the Pharisees are coming to Jesus, and they're mad at Jesus and his disciples for not following the religious laws and being ceremonially unclean. And Jesus makes this point. He says, listen, you guys are all about the surfacey things. And he's like, it's not about what's outside that makes you clean or unclean. It's what comes from the inside. And he really is getting to the condition of your heart. One of the favorite verses of mine that I use often to kind of check my own motives is Proverbs 4:23, and it says, above all else, guard your heart, because it affects everything you do. The condition of your heart affects what you do. And so Jesus says, if your heart is sinful, you're gonna do sinful things. If your heart is pure, if your heart is focused on Jesus, if God is at the center of your heart, you're gonna live for him and live the way he wants you to live. And so an assignment I have for you is to get a piece of paper and draw a heart. Now, I want you to spend some time praying and reflecting and asking God to show you what's in your heart. Maybe it's a cross that's at the center of the heart. Maybe there's brokenness. Maybe you have impure thoughts. Maybe you have some jealousy, some hatred. What does your heart look like? Spend some time doing that. That's just a really good way to reflect and see letting God show you what your heart is like. So I hope you do that today on Tuesday or Wednesday morning, and then we can talk about that a little bit tomorrow during youth group on Zoom at 3:30. So that's just a good practice for you to do. But God cares about what's inside the heart, because what's inside is what's going to affect what we actually do. The last part of Mark 7, you see that Jesus has compassion and heals someone who is demon-possessed. And then Jesus even has the ability to heal someone who is deaf and mute. And people are amazed at Jesus' power. Again, Mark 8 starts off with Jesus feeding, this time, 4,000 people with 12 loaves of bread and some small fish. We talked last time about how Jesus is able to feed a group of 5,000. And what's cool is there's actually leftover bread. Jesus does this huge miracle, and I think that what that shows us is that Jesus isn't able to just do enough. He's able to do more than enough. Jesus doesn't just provide, he more than provides. And so all of this is setting up this way of showing the disciples of who Jesus is, how amazing he is. And still he has some opposition with the Pharisees, and they're like, who is this? Who do you say it is? And then Jesus heals a blind man, and then you get to this beautiful part, and I want you to look at Mark 8:27. It says this: Jesus and his disciples went on to a village, and one of them asked, who do people say? Jesus asked them, who do people say I am? They replied, verse 28, some say John the Baptist, who's a prophet. Others say Elijah, another prophet. And still others say one of the prophets. But what about you? Jesus says. Who do you say I am? Middle school students, this is the most important question of all. Who do you say that Jesus is? Who is Jesus to you? To connect that idea to your heart, what place does Jesus have in your heart? Is he just kind of something that you add on to the side? Is he at the center of your heart? Who do you say that Jesus is? Now, Peter says, You are the Messiah. That means the King, the one who would bring healing to all. And an interesting thing happens here in the account in Mark. Jesus warns them not to tell anyone, is the very next verse, verse 30. And then Jesus goes on to predict his death. He says, listen, I'm going to die. It's like in Mark, he'd been he'd be healing people and say, hey, don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone. Peter's like, you're the Messiah. And then Jesus says, yep, I'm the Messiah, and I'm going to die. Peter and the other disciples, the Jews, they did not expect this. They should have seen it from Isaiah, but they didn't. They missed it. That the Messiah, God's Son, whom God sent down, would come to die. And there's this change that happens right here in Mark. From here on, it is all about Jesus' march to the cross. That Jesus would have to suffer and be rejected. See, the Jews and even the disciples wanted Jesus to come in and overthrow Rome. They wanted to make their life better. Jesus didn't come to make their life better. Jesus came to save them. Jesus didn't come to make your life better. He came to save you and give you eternal life, which trusting in him does make our life better. But that's kind of missing the point. Jesus has to be the center. Jesus changes our life. Jesus changes us. He calls us to die to ourselves and live brand new. Peter rebukes Jesus. Verse 32 says, he says, listen, you shouldn't be dying. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. He's like, no, I have to die. That's what's coming. Verse 34 through 38 says that if we want to follow Jesus, we have to pick up our cross. That means we have to be willing to die. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and the gospel will save it. Verse 36 of chapter 8. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, to get everything there is, and yet lose their soul? Or what good is it what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. What Jesus is saying here is that our life needs to belong to Jesus. Jesus doesn't want a part of our heart. He doesn't want us to have a heart, our heart with a little tiny cross and then a whole bunch of other things, sports, video games and books or hobbies. Like, those things should not be the important part of our heart. Our heart should be centered in on Jesus. And when our heart is centered in on Jesus and what he's done for us, that's when we are truly his disciples. We're truly willing to give up everything. And yeah, God enjoys those other hobbies. We've talked about that. But our life needs to be fully centered on Jesus. And that's what it means to be a disciple, a follower of Jesus. Jesus is at the center of all that we do. So again, I ask you, who do you say that Jesus is? And what is the condition of your heart? Because that's what Mark 7 and 8 are all about, is Jesus wants to say, I want to be at the crux, at the middle, at the center of your very life. That's what it means to follow Jesus. It's a Jesus-centered way of life, and it's the best life now and forever. Hey guys, thanks for checking in, and look forward to seeing you on Zoom tomorrow.